Hi there, and welcome to Ancestral Recall. I'm your host, Eli Kaplan. Ancestral Recall is a Magic YouTube show that shows the history of Magic the Gathering set by set and reveals and explains the cool and fun cards. And today, this is our very special 50th episode. Yes, we made it this far. For this episode, though, we're doing something different. Really different. Like, you've likely never heard of this different. Today, I'm going to talk about the trading card game produced by Wizards of the Coast, but I'm not going to be talking too much about Magic. This is a story of Magic's younger sibling. No, I'm going to tell you about the second trading card game produced by Wizards of the Coast, Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. Originally known as Jyhad, spelled with a Y, Vampire: The Eternal Struggle is a game of horror and intrigue, set in the world of White Wolf Game Studios' tabletop RPG, Vampire: The Masquerade. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to call it VTES. VTES was designed by Richard Garfield, the originator of Magic, and was designed for multiplayer or one-on-one duels. This was Wizards' first game based on a licensed property. And today I'm going to teach you the history and basis for the game, the rules, the setting, what the cards do, and what the impact of the game was. And yes, before I go any further, I will say that the name of the game was officially changed in the second printing to Vampire: The Eternal Struggle in order to avoid claims of religious intolerance against Islam. For what it's worth, I want to apologize if I've made any factual errors in this episode, as it's more ambitious than most of mine. And if you've ever read my show comments, you'll know that I do make factual errors. Explaining what the history of Magic is, or what this game is about in 30 minutes, is a Herculean undertaking. And while I've played VTES about 30 or 40 times, it hasn't been for years and years, so I very well may be misremembering something, and there are going to be details that I'm going to skip over. The purpose of this episode is to show the ideas and designs of Richard Garfield's second trading card game, how it used some of Magic's mechanics, and had its own rich innovations. I hope to explain why VTES was fun, as well as some of the game's weaknesses. For those of you familiar with the history of Marvel Comics, think of this episode as a what-if comic, or in DC, Elseworlds. A look at what Magic might look like if it had an entirely different creative conceit and was designed from the bottom up for multiplayer play. Duel Masters may be the younger, kid-friendly sibling to Magic, but VTES ran for over a decade and is still played today. Story! In 1991, there was a popular independent publisher called White Wolf Game Studio based out of Atlanta. They designed tabletop RPGs such as Ars Magica as a highly cultured, story-focused alternative to the more thud and blunder Dungeons & Dragons. And White Wolf had a hot property called Vampire: The Masquerade. Vampire, designed by Mark Reinhagen, was billed as a game mixing gothic horror and modern punk attitude. Every chapter of their book started off with a quote from sources diverse as Sun Tzu, Ministry, Benjamin Franklin, KMFDM, or Jane Austen. These vampires lived in the 20th and 21st centuries and embodied many different archetypes. The focus was on storytelling and eerie horror, not raw combat and loot acquisition. There was even a short-lived spin-off television series on Fox, Kindred: The Embraced, which was produced by 90210's Aaron Spelling. Vampire is also the source material for one of the most popular live-action role-playing games today, Mind's Eye Theater. While White Wolf was based in Atlanta, they had a very good relationship with Seattle's Peter Adkinson and Wizards of the Coast. Many vampire players at gaming cons like playing Magic in their downtime. In fact, White Wolf's naming convention for their tabletop games was used by Atkinson to give Magic the Gathering its name. Noun, the noun. Such as Vampire, the Masquerade. Werewolf, the Apocalypse. Mage, the Awakening. See what I mean? Many early Magic artists were also contributors to White Wolf's insert art. That is, the art that was published in black and white to illustrate pages. So when White Wolf wanted to do a trading card game, they went right to the originators of the genre and asked Wizards to design a trading card game using the setting and themes of Vampire. Wizards helped out with freelancers, and Richard Garfield was tapped to design the game itself. Garfield did use some of the existing mechanics from Magic, such as tapping and having a library, but took many of the concepts of Magic in very different directions to design a game built from the very bottom up as multiplayer. The game hit the street on August 16th, 1994. 21 different sets and expansions saw print, and while today no companies are printing or selling boosters, players are printing out cards and attending tournaments based on PDFs. The setting is present day, and vampires and other supernatural creatures exist and prey on humans, though they are unknown to the population at large. Vampires practice the strictest code of secrecy, the masquerade, and will kill their siblings if they reveal the existence of the supernatural to the public. Vampires always avoid using the term vampire themselves, considering it vulgar and risking their very nature, and they prefer calling each other kindred. Now, in this universe, vampires are humans transformed by the power of Cain, the first murderer. They can live forever and create children vampires by draining the blood of one of their victims, then returning some of their own VTES, or vampire blood, to the corpse. That corpse soon reanimates with a hunger. Each generation of vampires is weaker than the next as the blood of Cain weakens with distance from the source. But if a vampire can drink the heart's blood of another, more powerful vampire, the hunter takes in some of that elder's power while forever tainting their own soul. The oldest vampires, called Methuselahs, are inactive, using their powerful minds to control their children and followers, and thus wage war against each other. In Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, you, the player, represent an ancient Methuselah who tries to manipulate your control over large swaths of the Kindred through your machinations. You must gain control of lesser vampires and use them to attack your foe, while defending yourself from harm at the same time. What exactly is a vampire? When a human is transformed into a vampire, they find that they no longer consume food or water, only blood. Their hair does not grow, they do not age, and within their mind is implanted a beast, a hunger to prey upon the living. The beast is not only physiological but mental, a literal demon whispering in the vampire's ear. Most vampires do not kill the humans that they feed upon, taking just some blood, which is usually enough for them to stay active for a few nights. Vampires can use this blood to increase their speed or strength or activate many other preternatural abilities. Vampires can use VTES to heal wounds that would slay a mortal, although if they were to do so in public, they would put themselves at great risk. And there are a myriad of other powers that these vampires can use based upon their lineage. Fire and sunlight are mortal enemies of the Kindred and can easily force them comatose or turn them into ash. Thousands of years ago, the early vampires formed clans, each with their own distinct strengths and weaknesses. Vampire: The Eternal Struggle explores the 7 great clans of the Camarilla, vampires that attempt to try to retain their humanity, at least nominally. There are other clans of vampires, but those are outcasts, and lack the standing and prestige of these 7 clans. The 7 clans of the Camarilla are, in alphabetical order: the Bruja are a clan of philosophers, or at least they were in antiquity, but today they are anarchists, rabble-rousers, thugs, and instigators, or so the outsiders say. Some are scholars, but all have the weakness of being especially susceptible to losing their control and frenzying in a berserker-like rage, attempting to kill all others around them. The Bruja have the powers of celerity, supernatural speed, potence, indomitable strength, and inexplicable charisma. Clan Gangrel are outlanders. They travel between the cities, communing with nature and fleeing the power of clans more powerful than they. As the Gangrel age, they gain animal features such as fur, claw, or padded feet, eventually becoming unable to mix with humanity. The Gangrel have the powers of protean, shape-shifting, unique to their clan, so that they can spring claws of deadly power from their hands. They also can melt into the earth with this ability. They also possess the abilities of animalism, bonding and communicating with animals, and fortitude, inhuman toughness. The Malkavians are a clan of madmen, one and all. Schizophrenia, multiple personalities, and far worse lies in the minds of these pariahs, though most of them manage to be high-functioning. Other vampires know that the Malkavians have auspex, the power to see the unseen and read psychic auras, as well as obfuscation, the ability to cloud other people's minds so that they can travel unseen. The Malkavians also have domination, the power to control and coerce others' thoughts themselves, though some whisper that the Malkavians may also bear the power to infect their own madness upon others. This chills even the most inhumane of vampires. When cursed with vampirism, the Nosferatu clan's bodies and faces twist into horrific-looking frames that would never be mistaken for human. They are uniformly ugly as sin, though each's disfigurement is unique, and the other kindred generally urge the Nosferatu to dwell in the sewers and subterranean depths, so that the sewer rats don't have to be seen. The Nosferatu have powers of obfuscation, traveling under the cloak of others' minds. They also have remarkable strength and can control animals, usually sending roaches or mice to listen into privileged conversations. Despite universal loathing, the Nosferatu are the information brokers of the undead, and so their services are always in demand. Clan Toreador are everyone's friends. They throw the best parties, they are the wittiest, they are the prettiest, and they always know how to handle themselves in social situations. The weakness of the Clan of the Rose is that they can be transfixed by the beautiful, whether that be an amazing painting or a song or the reflection of the moon upon a lake. The Toreador can only wrench themselves away from these distractions with great mental exertion. Imbued with supernatural charisma, speed, and second sight, the Toreador often win their conflicts with political credit rather than brute force. House Tremere is descended from a medieval archmage who transformed his students against their will into vampires with stolen blood. These ambitious warlocks can use the blood to fly, create flame from nothing, and can doubtless perform other unknown mystical feats. The rest of the Camarilla find the Tremere's mystical abilities extremely useful, but they whisper that Tremere loyalties are always in doubt. Like the Malkavians, the Tremere can also access Auspex's second sight and dominate weaker minds. House Tremere prides itself on having no weakness in their blood, though in truth their members are strictly controlled by their hierarchy, with little freedom. The final clan are the Vantru, the elites and patricians of the Kindred, the blue blood, if you will. These vampires cannot feed on any other humans but the specific type that they prefer, such as doctors, young beautiful women, or people of a national origin. The Vantru claim that this is not a weakness, it is a simple fact of their refinement and superior breeding. But their enemies can starve a Vantru and force them into desperation if they eliminate access to the specific type of blood. The Vantru are the clan with the greatest access to wealth and finance, and can throw money at almost any problem to solve it. If forced to rely on their own preternatural talents, their mind control skills, fortitude, and charisma can allow them to endure almost any crisis. The youngest of vampires, who are controlled by the Camarilla, may lack association with one of these 7 clans and instead be marked Kaitif, clanless. They have no friends or allies to back them up, and are generally considered ineffectual. Strangely enough, being overlooked can afford them the greatest amount of surprise and freedom when they do take action. Almost all Kaitif have a distinct weakness, in addition to not having the backing and support of one of the great clans. To compare to magic, the vampiric clans are something like colors as well as tribes, though as the game got more expansions, more clans were added to match the setting. If I had to explain the other clans as well as the bloodlines, man, I'd be here all day. But the clans are also less important than colors, as each vampire that you recruit has its own collection of disciplines, powers, And you can intermingle a young Toreador with speed and charisma into a Bruja deck, which also relies on speed and charisma, and that Toreador will work perfectly fine. Now, if you look here at a vampire card, each of them has a number in the bottom right corner, their blood capacity. Each of them has a name, and each of them has one or more small icons in the lower left, either square-shaped or diamond-shaped. Square indicates that the vampire possesses a discipline, but is not a master of it. The diamond indicates superior skill. A few others have additional abilities in small text boxes, such as having a title or being able to search your library for weapons, for example. There's a lot of information embedded into each vampire card, but in my opinion, they do have a simple elegance as well. Mechanics. Okay, let's get into how the game works. The goal of the game is to win by having the most victory points. You can either eliminate your opponent in a one-on-one duel or get the most victory points in the multiplayer game. Now, multiplayer is the default mode of play for the game, and the vast majority of cards are designed with multiple players in mind. Now, you are the predator of the player of your left, hoping to drive them to zero pool and thus eliminating them from the game. And you also happen to be the prey of the player to your right, that sneaky son of a gun. Now, you don't have to be the last player standing in the game to win. You win by getting the most victory points. And yes, ties can and do happen. Now, most multiplayer games function best with 4 to 5 players. If you manage to eliminate your prey, you get a bonus of 6 blood to your pool, a huge advantage. So your predator may attempt to act on your prey's behalf to avoid their quarry gaining 6 more life. 6 more life, or blood, or pool, to use the more technical term, is huge in this game. So as you can see in VTES, politics are crucial. Each player, or Methuselah, starts the game with 30 blood in their personal pool, which is referred to as pool, as well as 4 face-down vampire cards drawn from the crypt, an orange-backed library that represents vampires that you are starting off the game working to influence. During the influence phase of your turn, players move blood from their personal pool to their minions, and when the minion has blood equal to its complete capacity, it then moves into the player's main area where they can take actions. The first player gets to transfer 1 blood on their turn, the next player gets 2, up to the maximum of 4 transfers per turn. This helps overcome the advantages of going first. Vampires almost always possess the disciplines favored by their clan, and some have other powers as well. Once the vampires have been fully bought and invested in, they can now be used to attack other Methuselahs, call votes, acquire equipment or followers, hunt for blood to replenish their supply, destroy weakened vampires, or sit back and play defense. Of course, the more blood you invest in a vampiric minion, the less you have to soak up attacks from your predator. Besides your crypt, you also have a hand, which is filled with 7 cards from your library. The hand is where most of the action of the game relies on. Now, crypt cards have orange backs designed to resemble a marble headstone or crypt, while library cards have a green back. The biggest difference between Magic and VTES is that in Magic, you only draw 1 card per turn, whereas in VTES, you replace a card in your hand as soon as, or very soon after you use it, back up to 7 cards. So you've always got a shot at having action. At the end of your turn, you can even discard a card from your hand to draw a new one if you like. That's the replacement for Magic's draw step. Oh, and here's another thing about VTES that can blow your mind. You can run as many copies of a card in your library as you like. Yeah, that 4 of rule in Magic, forget it. Then again, in multiplayer games, it is possible to gang up on one player who's doing broken things. As a default, vampires can attack an opponent, though as is the case with Magic, they attack a player, they do not attack that player's vampires directly, usually. Or they can hunt, adding a blood from the blood bank to their capacity in order to keep active. Hunting is an action with +1 stealth, which means that If a predator or prey vampire wants to block this action, the player can only intervene by having a card that gives a blocker intercept. Intercept counters stealth. An action with stealth can only be blocked by an untapped vampire with enough intercept. But if a vampire attempts to block an action, the acting vampire's player can use cards to increase the action's stealth, which will then go unblocked if the blocker can offer up additional cards or resources to increase their intercept. This represents the abstract concept of hunter and hunted. If a vampire successfully attacks a player, that player loses 1 life, and the attacking player gains a token in the game called the Edge. If a player can manage to untap on their turn with the Edge in their possession, they gain 1 life. Or pool, I should say. Your life in the game is always called pool, and normally everyone uses beads or coins or counters to represent their life, never dice. Since blood is your main resource in a game about vampires, it gets moved around a lot. Technically speaking, blood you have, that's pool again. But anyway, I repeat myself. I mentioned calling votes. Calling votes is a key mechanic in Vampire, though not every player relies on political might as their key to victory. Players don't call votes. Vampires that they control may declare them as an action at +1 stealth. Now, if the vote comes to the table, well then, vampires with titles get to have a say. There are princes, rulers of cities like Atlanta, Seattle, or Amsterdam. Princes get 2 votes, and it is possible for other vampires to steal their title. Only 1 vampire can lay claim to rule Boston, for example. Now, as a language note, female princes are also referred to as princes unless that female vampire explicitly prefers the gendered form. Now, below the princes are the primogen, recognized leaders, patricians, patrons, or kingpins who don't quite control a city, but still definitely manage to push their weight around. Above the princes are the justiciars, the recognized representative of each clan that keeps its members in line. Justiciars have 3 votes as befitting their high status. Now, votes in the game can do direct damage to players, they can destroy resources, they can tap vampires of a specific clan, they can reward players who control vampires of a specific clan, or they can endow a vampire with control over a city, giving them a title, giving more political clout to ensure that later votes go that player's way. Voting is an extremely cool mechanic, because in addition to the titles, you can discard political cards from your hands to gain additional votes. So someone who doesn't appear to have a voice may actually be able to swing the votes. Now again, I mentioned that you have to declare votes as an action, and this action is a +1 stealth. Participating in the vote, well, that's a free action. One thing that's quite different from Magic in terms of gameplay is that you take actions with your vampires one at a time, as opposed to Magic, where when you attack a player, you attack all at once. This allows for more strategic gameplay. Blocking also taps the blocker as part of the process, provided that the vampire successfully blocks. If the acting vampire can muster enough stealth to get by, then the defending vampire that tried to block remains untapped. So what happens when an action gets blocked? Well, then the game moves on to combat. And vampire combat is quite interesting. Vampires will frequently punch each other. Some of them can punch with incredible strength. Some of them can grow claws and deal extremely lethal damage, similar to Death Touch. Some of them can use the dark arts and throw searing fire at their opponents. Some of them will throw a manhole lid at the other guy. Some of them will use their incredible charisma to stop the fight altogether and walk away unmolested. Or if a vampire wants to prepare itself, it can go into a gun store ahead of time and buy a gun and fill their opponents with lead. Now, bullets don't usually keep vampires down for the count, though. Let's get into combat mechanics. Now, at the beginning of combat, there's a maneuver phase, where players can decide if the vampiric fight is at long range or short range, which is the default. To get to long range, someone must have a maneuver. Now, guns come with a maneuver, so that they can shoot enemies at long range or short range, but when you have a gun, you would prefer to shoot them from long range so you don't get hurt. A maneuver to go to long range can be countered by the opposing player with their own maneuver, similar to how stealth can be blocked by intercept. Then each player declares the vampire's strike, the tool by which they are attacking. The default damage is that 1 damage gets taken off, although some attacks can do considerably more. Some sources of supernatural damage, such as magic swords or sunlight, are so powerful that they force a vampire into unconscious, deep sleep, akin to magic's death touch. This state is referred to as torpor. Vampires in torpor can only be awakened by expending a considerable amount of blood or being rescued by another active vampire. Note that damage in this game is permanent. It does not heal at the end of combat, though blood can be restored by hunting or some form of assistance from the master. Some vampires can play cards to prevent damage, however, and other vampires can use abilities to get additional attacks, getting 2 or 3 hits in when the normal vampire would only have 1. Normally, at this point, the combat will end. But if a player wants the combat to continue, they can play a press, which leads to another round. But a press to continue can be countered by another press, however, which will end the combat unless the initial player plays yet another press. There are strategies that players use to manipulate combat, using a vampire with superior combat skills to strike the other again and again until that vampire is beaten into unconsciousness. And when the vampire falls into unconsciousness or torpor, horrible things can happen to them. An enemy vampire can crawl into the vampire's crypt where they sleep and slay them, absorbing their very soul. While you, the player, never actually get into a combat, as is the case with Magic, you do have the ability to directly influence the game beyond recruiting vampires by playing Master cards. These cards, with a gray border, add resources such as a radio station to give a vampire intercept, their real estate grabs for profit, or their actions to tutor a younger vampire secret techniques to enhance their disciplines or give them new abilities altogether. Now, there are a number of different paths to victory, such as stealth, doing stealthy damage to bleed your opponents out, blowing large holes in your enemy's vampires with guns, mind control, or just pummeling your prey's vampires into pieces. It's not the easiest thing to get involved in the rivalry across the table, thanks to the attack left, block right design, but that also helps you orchestrate your plans a little more effectively. Duels can take 5 to 20 minutes, whereas multiplayer games usually go for an hour or 2. Again, there's more to it than that, but this is the short explanation hitting the high points. Now, I don't want to get too specific here, but Jyhad, the first edition, sold quite well, despite the controversies over the game's name, and finally, a year later, it got renamed Vampire: The Eternal Struggle for the second edition in '95. The card backs were changed, causing quite a bit of consternation among players over marked cards, since you could have libraries with both backs, and opaque card sleeves did not exist at the time to resolve that issue. Outside of combat and voting, there isn't a lot that players do on other players' turns, but I do want to mention that there are out-of-turn master cards that can be played just like instants for Magic, as well as reaction cards that vampires can play that only get played on other people's turns. Now, these cards don't always have resource costs, but since you only get to play one master card on your turn, and if you play something out of turn that replaces your own master ability, there is a timing resource issue going on here. Instants are a ton of fun for Magic, but there are games where playing stuff when it's not your own turn can make the game feel bad or less fun on the whole. And the instant role in VTES is more or less replaced by defenders in combat, playing their abilities. Why is Vampire: The Eternal Struggle relevant? What can we take away from it? Now, VTES takes some of the elements of Magic and adds quite a few different spins to fit the context. In Magic, there are weak effects and creatures and powerful spells and creatures. The mana system regulates this by telling players when they can play things and adding some inconsistency and randomness to the process. Instead of having a mana system to pay for cards, VTES has several different economics systems. Players transfer blood from their pool to their uncontrolled minions every turn. Buying guns or motorcycle or internet access also costs pool. Actions such as casting a thaumaturgical spell or throwing a car or getting extra actions cost minions blood. Fighting costs blood, and minions get damaged. This limits the number of times that vampires can fight before they have to hunt. Vampires also have limits as to what supernatural abilities they can use based on their disciplines. Younger vampires just aren't as effective as the older ones. There's an economy of resources in the game, and it gets rid of some of the ones that Magic players take for granted. In Magic, creatures heal at the end of turn. Here, not so much. Compared to Magic, VTES's combats are usually less lethal, more unpredictable, and have a sense of dread. And thanks to the constantly refreshing hand, it's much more enjoyable than just comparing power and toughness. And there's this huge, omnipresent thematic element, blood. That's what makes VTES effective as a story about vampires. The other thing is that with the concept of prey and predator, stealth and intercept, titles and voting, this is a fascinating look at a game built from the ground up with multiplayer built in by Richard Garfield. Individual cards in hand are less exciting, they're more incremental than in Magic, and the flow of cards is what can feel fast and exciting. Your creatures, the vampires, do interesting and dynamic actions while you, the puppet master, have a more reserved role. I'm not saying that Magic needs to adopt such systems wholesale. The whole voting system of the Conspiracy release was quite disposable in my opinion. But this is a fascinating look at a game that could arguably be called Magic's brother or sister. VTES is a reimagining of the nuts and bolts of the trading card game genre from its most important progenitor, recast in a new light. And that's well worth looking at. It's a slower game than Magic, but its focus on multiplayer and the social element makes it distinct from any other trading card game on the market at the time. Vampire: The Eternal Struggle lasted for well over a decade, with Wizards publishing the revised edition and 3 expansions before handing the title over to White Wolf to develop and print on their own. White Wolf printed over a dozen expansions and revised core sets, stopping the presses with physical cards in 2009. But since then, the game has continued to receive support from its online fans, who create digital expansions akin to the living card game model of Fantasy Flight, and the game continues to truck along as an informal living card game. The rights to the game are currently held by Iceland's CCP, the video game company famous for developing and owning EVE Online. But since CCP failed to bring a White Wolf-themed MMO to market, the property is currently in developmental hell. So now that you've heard all this, if you'd like to learn more about Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, feel free to check out this website, VTES1.wordpress.com. It gets regularly updated and has some very comprehensive details and facts about the game. There's so much stuff about the game here that just looking at it makes my eyes water. It's been years since I played with my cards, but I do still have my old ones, and I did build about 12 or 15 decks back in the day. Oh, so much fun. Anyway, I know that this show was a major change of pace, but I wanted to give a bit of backstory to the history of trading card games as a whole, not just Magic. And in the future, there's another very old trading card game that I'd like to talk about. We might see it for episode 75, or if you guys like this, I might bump it up. I might bump it up too, depending on what's going on in the movie theaters at the time. But anyway, what do you guys think of this episode? Did it surprise you? What did you like or dislike? Should I talk about other trading card games in the future? Let me know. Leave comments. And if you enjoyed this, like, share with your friends, and subscribe. Next time on Ancestral Recall, we're returning to Ice Age Block with Alliances. This is Eli Kaplan for Ancestral Recall, signing off. Good games and good luck.